Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. On the advisory chart here, one out for the Koyukuk Valley, the lower Koyukuk Valley, and also the southern slopes of the eastern Alaska Range along the Dalton Highway. That's for this evening, and that's for areas of light drizzle at times and could make conditions on the slippery side, but then that's over by midnight. So yesterday's satellite showed a very weak system here, retrograding westward across the Gulf of Alaska. Some more moisture here with those clouds, Bristol Bay on up to the north. Whole area streaming northward across Norton Sound. Some clouds on the north slope, and then a frontal system, low pressure south of Adak in the front across or just to the west of the eastern Aleutians. Now for today, you can see that's moved off to the east and northeast and brought winds as high as 40 miles an hour at Cold Bay and gusts today, with some rain and fog falling over the eastern Aleutians and up across the Pribilof Islands. Front greatly weakened here. You can see not all that impressive, and the main low hanging back over the far western Aleutians. And that's circulating some colder air down across Shimia with snow and rain there, and winds gusting 40 to 50 miles per hour. Got some clouds and brought some light amounts of precipitation into the northeast Gulf Coast and northern Panhandle today, kind of just sliding northward there with the flow. And another batch of moisture here brought some areas of light snow from just southwest of Nabezna up across Northway and northward, but not quite making it to Eagle, where they had east winds gusting to about 20 miles per hour. And then the cloudiness up here associated with the, which actually this area here, moving northeastward, might bring that freezing drizzle into areas there along the Dalton Highway. On the chart today, the main low here over in Canada, and then that trough trailing back down across the northern southeast coast, Elfin Cove on over to Yakutat, and then that moisture wrapping back around and producing the light snow there over the in and around the Northway area, with some flurries a little farther back to the west. High pressure off the Arctic coast there, keeping the breezes mostly east or northeast, a little brisker on the west side, and that trough giving some areas of light snow, again, nothing significant, all the way down to Nome, where they had some light rain and snow today. And then another weak area of cloudiness bringing some flurries there to portions of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Not too bad over Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, actually even up across Kenai Peninsula into Cook Inlet. And then tighter gradient, again, those gusty winds there, 30 to 40 miles an hour across the Alaska Peninsula, and less wind, but lower flying conditions, a little more rain and fog than they had over at Cold Bay and on Alaska, and some showers following that front behind, and then the snow back with the main low center back to the west. And on the forecast for tonight, mostly easterly flow should keep it mostly clear, with VFR extending out past Nunivak Island, and this trough will produce a few showers there along the Aleutian Range, Shelikof Strait, northeastward along the North Gulf Coast, but again, nothing too terribly heavy, and mostly right along the coastline. There could be some light rain and snow showers working northward into the Coast Range, possibly the southern Wrangell Mountains, but basically pretty nice here over the interior, just a few clouds, and then looks like that moisture will lift northward and bring a few flurries to the Arctic coast and North Slope, with basically dry conditions up here over the Northwest Valleys into the Chukchi Sea, and most of this light snow will be from the Bering Strait down across St. Lawrence Island, but it's all shifting off to the northwest. And then the next big storm coming up, there's a center there, and a pretty good frontal system. You can see the gradient there associated with it, especially in advance of the front. That's going to be moving northward and bring some 40 to 50 knot winds into the North Gulf Coast, and a lot of moisture coming up with that, as we'll see for tomorrow. Look for rain and wind to increase all along the southeast coast, Gulf of Alaska, on up into the North Gulf Coast, and then back down across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. Some pretty good winds, especially for the next couple of days. Gales to possible storm force winds here in Bristol Bay, especially on Tuesday, with 40 to 50 knots rolling into the North Gulf Coast and down across Kodiak Island later tonight and tomorrow. Very weak front out here by comparison over the central Bering Sea, and still keeping some rain in, or rain and snow mixed over the Pribilof Islands, and areas of rain, but northeast winds increasing there for the Unalaska to Nikulski area. Dry break, and then another system bringing some more gusty winds and moisture into the far western Aleutians. Forecast for Tuesday, pretty good trough swings up into Bristol Bay, so the possible storm force winds with that out of the east when that swings up there, along with a good shot of rain or rain and snow showers here, with decreasing amounts back toward Kodiak Island, kind of a rain changing to shower condition, and some mixed rain and snow showers with gusty southeast winds here, especially through turning an arm, because you guess 40 miles an hour, and even higher here on the southern western Alaska Range, with showers along this trough all the way down and across the southeast coast, but some clearing behind that with showers ending. And there'll be a narrow band here from the Eagle down to Northway, possibly right through this area. Possible snow showers or flurries, but nothing heavy. Either side of that, pretty fair conditions. Arctic coast on the east side, lightest winds, but winds getting a little brisk here on the west side, and then dropping off again, and just still northeast breezes. Offshore flow should keep it pretty nice with the higher ceilings of visibilities right along the coast and out a little ways. And these easterly winds become variable as this low center shifts up across the Alaska Peninsula. Looks like the strongest winds will be overnight tomorrow night, and then as the low center moves northward, some good south and southwest winds, or southwesterlies, will follow in behind. And then we have a low here over the eastern Aleutians. That's going to be pulling some cold air down, and so this Arctic front or cold front will be spreading some snow and snow showers down toward the western Aleutians during the afternoon hours. High pressure again to the north, dry conditions, gusty east winds along the Arctic coast, mainly on the west side, and looks like locally through the passes of the western Brooks Range. For temperatures today, mostly in the upper 30s to mid 40s for the Panhandle. 41 at Cordova, 20 degrees up at Gulkana, and 10 degrees warmer here in Anchorage with 36 at Kenai, 45 at Homer, and a 23 in Talkeetna, 17 there at Nenana, 23 in Fairbanks, 21 at Delta, 19 over at Eagle with 17 at Tanana. McGrath came in with 22. These are all 4 p.m. readings, and 10 degrees there at Arctic Village, 10 below zero up at Kaktovik, and generally 10 to 20 below along the Arctic coast, with minus 21 at Atusuk compared to 15 below at Barrow, 3 above over at Cape Lisburne, 26 there in Kotzebue, 24 at Buckland with a 23-degree reading reported by Ambler. Nome, 32 degrees. And let's see, that's St. Mary's with 28, 34 at Macoriac. And down at Bethel, 30 degrees. The other side of the mountains there, notably warmer with 40 degrees at Sparavon, 43 Iliamna. That looked like a pretty common temperature right on down the Alaska Peninsula there, and Kodiak Island with Sand Point up to 45, 43 Unalaska, 40 degrees in St. Paul, upper 30s, lower 40s for the Aleutians. Lows for tonight, not too bad, above zero there for the eastern interior, but then dropping 5 to 15 below up over the Yukon Flats, and of course below zero for the North Slope and the Arctic coast, but still pretty mild here across the Norton Sound area, Seward Peninsula, all the way down into the southwest, with King Salmon forecasting a low of 32 and 38 at Cold Bay, so upper 30s to lower 40s for the peninsula and 30s out to the west. Highs for tomorrow, lower 40s in the northern southeast coast to upper 40s to maybe approaching 50 down to the south. Otherwise, south central Alaska, lower to mid 30s, a little bit milder out along the coast. You can see the mid 40s here, Kodiak Island, Homer on over to Cordova, with temperatures north of the Alaska Range just about all below zero, and a little below zero, not too bad up there over the northeast, and still mild 20s all the way up to the Noatak Valley. Flying weather, IFR spreading northward and then pulling back to the west, so from about just west of Yakutat over to Cordova, spreading into Prince William Sound, eventually getting into Whittier. In fact, there'll probably be IFR there through Passage Canal in toward Whittier, and that'll extend down across Kodiak Island all the way to the Alaska Peninsula, but good VFR just a short ways to the north, Cook Inlet across the interior, all the way up to the Arctic coast. IFR, St. Lawrence Island, coming back through the Pribilofs on down to the eastern Aleutians, and marginal VFR in areas out to the west. Passes Anatuvik looks good on either approach, VFR with Adigan, same forecast. Lake Clark and Merrill starting out marginal and then becoming VFR. Rainy VFR from start to finish tomorrow, and for windy VFR conditions, both entrances. Isabel looking pretty good with VFR. And Mentasta, also VFR. Tanita, VFR. Portage, IFR, becoming IFR in the eastern approach and becoming marginal on the west side. For Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, and with the mild southeasterly flow, 6,000 feet pulling northward, and 2,000 feet right along the coast, but actually extending all the way up to the Bering Strait, with the surface south of that near St. Lawrence Island, down in across southern Cook Inlet and hugging the coastline all the way around to the Panhandle. For icing tomorrow, could be some areas here, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and more over the eastern Aleutians, and then a new batch rolling in to the far western Aleutians, mostly below 7,000 feet, and then all that moisture coming northward. Pretty good icing potentials coming up across the southeast coast, especially up to the North Gulf Coast, back down toward Kodiak Island. And again, that whole area continue moving north tomorrow night, with areas mostly below 12,000 feet. And the winds aloft for midday tomorrow, we have a ridge coming in aloft here, right up across the eastern Gulf of Alaska, followed by good southwest flow, and that system will be following that right on up, ridging across the interior, so looking pretty good there. And at 9,000 feet, east winds with that system up to 60 knots here coming across the Barren Islands, and pretty good winds all the way back to the Yakutat area, southeasterlies 50 to 55 off the southeast coast. High pressure, lighter, more variable winds from about the Alaska Range all the way up to the Arctic coast, and you can see these easterlies 35 right onto the northern Bering Sea, 50-knot northeasterlies there just east of Atka Island, and then going back to the southwest, 25 to 50 knots with that next system. 3,000-foot winds, again 50 to 65 knots here, right in toward almost to Montague Island and the southern Cook Inlet area. 25 knots Kodiak Island, actually coming down to 25. You'll see stronger winds than that later tonight into early tomorrow, and then dropping off, but 50-knot winds across Bristol Bay and 25 to 50 knots out to the west. And again, that light variable wind condition up to the north with high pressure, but 30-knot winds there across the Seward Peninsula. Turbulence-wise, moderate chop advancing northward here, especially for smaller aircraft, up to the North Gulf Coast by tomorrow afternoon, if not earlier, down across Kodiak Island, and those gusty winds across Bristol Bay down in the eastern Aleutians and Kodiak Island, eventually spreading into the southeast coast. And that pattern is probably going to stick around through Tuesday here for the Bristol Bay area. Areas of light to isolated moderate chop along the Alaska Range there, possibly the Tanana Valley, White Mountains, and the Yukon Delta coast, with the Brooks Range, possibly the western Arctic coast where there's a little more wind there, there'll be a little bit better chance of seeing some turbulence of the mechanical variety. And out over the western Aleutians, again, that next system with the stronger winds bringing more turbulence in out that way. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
What is it about the ocean that attracts so many of us? We like to play in it, get our food from it, build our houses near it, and gaze out at it. Our economy depends on the goods that come in and go out through our major ports. The ocean makes us feel good, contributes to our economic growth, and we like to be close to it. It's not surprising then that almost half of our population lives near the coastline. But working and playing along the coast is not always serene. Powerful coastal storms can raise the water level significantly, 20 feet or even more, causing loss of life, destroying homes, businesses, and property. Hurricanes like Katrina and Ike showed us firsthand the risks that coastal communities face.
It was 32 feet. We went through the first floor to the second floor, through the attic. The water came up to us like here on the roof. And we talking about swimming to the tree. And luckily, it subsided.
With ocean waters warming and sea levels rising, it is likely that the U.S. will encounter future storms equally as harmful and costly. And with so many people living along the coast, the stakes are getting higher each year. Storm destruction is rarely limited to lost lives and property. Instruments collecting water level and meteorological information must be located in harm's way so they can deliver data critical for flooding forecasts and emergency evacuations. But all too often, these stations are damaged or destroyed during the very times we need them. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, has responded to this dilemma by strengthening some of its storm tide stations. Known as NOAA Sentinels of the Coast, these platforms are single-pile, 4 feet in diameter structures that stand at least 20 feet above the sea surface and are driven 60 to 100 feet into the seafloor for stability. For over 200 years, NOAA has monitored the rise and fall of tides using the latest technology. Beginning with human observers in the early 19th century, NOAA has harnessed technology to operate its network of tide stations that automatically collect accurate and reliable data every 6 minutes. Today, NOAA maintains more than 200 permanent water level observing stations. NOAA's goal is to ensure that the public has advance notice based on the most accurate and up-to-date storm tide and meteorological information. This is only possible, however, when the tide stations operate throughout the storm. So Sentinels are designed to withstand a Category 4 hurricane, with winds up to 155 miles per hour and storm surges of nearly 20 feet above normal. Planning, design, construction, and operation required a team of experts in surveying, engineering, pile installation, oceanography, quality control, and web expertise. With new technology, NOAA is better meeting the needs of coastal communities. Lives are often at stake during the 24 hours before a major storm. Once floodwaters begin to rise, it becomes critical to know which evacuation routes are passable.
Having this kind of immediate real-time data up close that our community has access to is critical for us in our day-to-day operations.
Each Sentinel will report real-time water level and meteorological observations. Water level measurements are precisely referenced to ensure that coastal communities can make informed decisions to elevate housing, build levees, and plan evacuation routes. In addition to storm tide reporting, the products that result from NOAA's instruments also contribute to safe navigation, accurate charting, marine engineering, sea level change monitoring, and other important activities.
Before we send crews out, we always check the tides, because being in South Louisiana, you have to make sure your barges and boats can get in before you can even begin your work. So the tide information is very important.
The first Sentinels were constructed along the Gulf Coast at Calcasieu Pass, Amarada Pass, and Shell Beach in Louisiana, and Bay Waveland in Mississippi. Hurricanes Gustav and Ike tested the Sentinels within weeks of installation. Standing strong, they delivered storm tide data, which were used by emergency responders as well as thousands of coastal residents. More Sentinels are planned and will be built at exposed coastal locations as funding becomes available. Other stations in less exposed areas will be elevated above storm surge range on substantial structures. Coastal communities must be ever vigilant. Even tropical storms can deal a massive blow to many residents, especially storms that make landfall on a high tide. Sentinels are designed to serve the over 150 million residents of coastal communities, planning for the worst and hoping that we never need those plans. However, if the unthinkable happens, NOAA Sentinels will be there standing tall, providing a safe haven for instruments that are vital to planning for and responding to nature's fury.
Welcome back. Looking at the ice chart here, it looks like decreasing ice amounts south of Nunivak Island all the way down into Bristol Bay. And with the increasing east and northeast winds, that's going to be kind of pulling off to the west and southwest. Otherwise, up to the north, you can see pretty well iced in all the way well around the Arctic coast, but not much in the way of any shore-fast ice. And for the southeast coast tomorrow, gales arriving during the day. Southeasterlies increasing 30 to 35 knots, more of an easterly direction up along the north coast. Inside waters, winds coming up to small craft levels there with 25 knot winds, but northerlies 15 for Lynn Canal. And then those will swing around to the south as lower pressure pushes northward up into the Yukon, 20 to 25 knots. And diminishing winds down to the south, dropping off kind of some ridging right over the area there, so variable to southwest 10 for the southern inside waters, southeast 20 all along the southern coast up to the north, and southerlies at 15 on the extreme north coast. For Monday here, gale warnings coming up tonight, later tonight and tomorrow, with easterlies 40 to 45 knots, and could be even a band of 50 knot winds in advance of the front there, with 40 knot winds, Kodiak Island, northeasterlies gales, Shelikof Strait right up into Kamishak Bay and Cook Inlet, south of the Forelands, 30 knots from the northeast, north of the Forelands winds coming up to 20 knots, and northeast 25 for Prince William Sound. And then for Tuesday, east winds at 30 here for the North Gulf Coast, and small craft advisories for the western area. Then back into the gales there for the Barren Islands, but dropping off to 20 knots there, Kodiak Island and over Shelikof Strait as the stronger winds shift into Bristol Bay. East-northeasterlies there for the southern inlet and Kamishak Bay, 20 knots. And 25 knot winds north of the Forelands coming out, turning an arm, and then turning down the inlet. That'll be a little stronger on the north side than it will be down to the south. Out to the west tomorrow, a full gale here, Bristol Bay, all the way down across the Alaska Peninsula, northeasterlies at 40, seas running from 8 feet in Bristol Bay to 12 feet down toward Cape Sarachev, and even higher on the Pacific side. Easterlies 40 knots, seas coming up to 16 feet, and northeast 40 with 17-foot seas there for the western area on the Pacific side. And then on Tuesday for Bristol Bay, it looks like a pretty good possibility you could see some storm force winds from the east and southeast as that pretty potent trough swings through. Low pressure lifting north of the peninsula, starting out lighter and variable early in the day Tuesday, then swinging around to the southwest at about 25, southwest 30 to 35 here on the Pacific side of the peninsula, southeasterlies at about 40 from Sitkinak to Chignik. And out in the Aleutians for the eastern areas, 25 to 30 knot northerlies, more of a northeast direction and lighter here west of Nikolsky, swinging around to the east-southeast at about 20 toward Adak and Atka, and then those winds increasing out to the west, southeast 30 to east 35 knots toward Shimia. And for the next day, Tuesday, 25 knot northeasterlies and then lighter winds west of Adak, east-northeast at about 20 to 25, and then the Fox Islands, mostly an easterly wind at 15 to 20. For the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, gales developing there from the northeast, and almost, or coming down toward the Pribilof Islands, coming up to 30 knots there for St. Paul and St. George. North of Nunivak Island, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots, with 25 knot winds out over the northern Bering Sea. And for Tuesday, gales here, gales for the St. Lawrence Island area, and brisk wind advisories north of Nunivak Island, with gales south of the island there from a more easterly direction out of Kuskokwim Bay, and then going northeast again at 35 across the Pribilofs with some higher gusts, where seas will be coming up to about 14 feet, and looks like the strongest winds will be northern Bering Sea here, mostly west of St. Matthew Island at 40 knots with 17-foot seas. Up along the Arctic coast, not too bad in the winds tomorrow. Easterly, east-northeast at about 10 knots with stronger winds, as I mentioned earlier, here on the west side. Brisk wind advisories on the western coast with the strongest wind gusts probably around Point Ley, but we've got brisk wind advisories into the zone west of Cape Lisburne, and then dropping back to 15 knots across Kotzebue Sound in the southeast Chukchi Sea. And those will be even lighter, it looks like, on Tuesday, but still briskest winds will be on the west coast again, where there's a little more gradient, but dropping back off here, 10 knots, Barrow, 10 to 15 knots all the way over to Demarcation Point. Some areas could be a little more easterly, but generally holding on to the northeast direction. For tonight, again, a trough keeping some showers and areas of rain north Gulf Coast and Panhandle, but the next big storm here spreading northward tomorrow, make a pretty good jog to the north with the gale force winds and again possible storm force winds and rain spreading up to the north Kodiak Island, wet and windy, wind rain increasing along the Panhandle. Pretty fair out here, but increasing winds also over the western interior. And for Tuesday, another trough springs up with the heaviest impact here over Bristol Bay from Kodiak Island. Have a great evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.